This breakout session 4, Trade Facilitation, including Customs Cooperation, session to be chaired by Professor Abhijit Das, Head, Center for WTO Studies, with a special remarks from Mr. Khan, Vice Chair, UN CEFACT, and then we have 5 panelists. So, Dr. Das, Professor Das, to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prabir Day. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Although we are rather small in terms of numbers, I'm sure the content of our deliberations will more than make up. As we heard yesterday, not once but repeatedly, if there is one area where gains can be garnered in South Asia, then that area is trade facilitation and customs cooperation. We did hear that the cost of trading amongst SAARC countries is perhaps one of the highest in the world. And if South Asian countries were to get their act together and find ways of cutting trade costs, enhancing customs cooperation, that would be an extremely useful recipe, extremely relevant way forward for enhancing regional trade. So in this session, we have a very excellent mix of speakers. Some are hardcore practitioners, some are academicians. So we will really have a very good cross-fertilization of ideas, thoughts, and let's see if at the end we are able to synthesize and come up with a possible way forward. I have Mr. T.A. Khan, who's the Vice Chair, UN CEFACT. He would deliver special remarks. That would be followed by Mr. Tenfai Wang from UN ESCAP, Mr. Ismail Nahid from Maldives Customs, Mr. Raghu Dayal from AITD, my old friend and colleague Mr. Shashank Priya from the Customs Department, and Ms. Darshini Premaratne from IPS Colombo. Could I request all the resource persons to spend about 8 to 10 minutes on their presentation? Even if the presentation is slightly longer than that, it would be useful if the speakers could confine themselves to not more than 10 minutes. With that, could I turn to Khan Sahab, Mr. T.A. Khan, to deliver his special remarks.
Good afternoon. We have debated a lot about trade facilitation, and we recognize that in the current context, trade facilitation without induction of IT or induction of the technology, perhaps the competitive edge comes from there. So I will limit my 8 or 10 minutes to the issues and the avenues the technology provides for trade facilitation. That is the topic of my 8 minutes today. The background of this is that I have had the pleasure to be part of a business process analysis study for these 4 countries, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and India, which was an initiative by UN ESCAP and ADB some time back, which has highlighted a lot of induction of technology for leveraging this trade facilitation process. And also UN ESCAP resolution number 68-3, which talks in terms of enabling paperless trade and the cross-border recognition of electronic data and documents for inclusive and sustainable intra-regional trade facilitation. This is very hotly being debated in terms of the institutional framework which need to be created for transacting the business electronically, and perhaps from there it flows the competitive edge. I will only underline the need of a business process analysis, but that is the first step for moving towards a paperless environment for facilitating trade. But there are n number of further steps which I really don't want to bother you in my 8 minutes discussion with you. Why? Because every topic calls for a 8 hours discussion. So the step-by-step approach indicated here is that business process analysis, the first step, the process simplification and harmonization, which is necessary for us to move forward in this. Document simplification and alignment, national data harmonization, clubbed with, if you are doing cross-border trade, then the cross-border data harmonization and exchange mechanism to be built, and then getting on to the single window environment and the paperless trading environment, which is the ultimate which one would like to cover in this. So I am only bringing before you some of the recommendations which this business process analysis study which has brought in, which may be of interest to you to understand that what kind of competitive advantage one would like to address in this exercise. So for studying this, study was conducted for 3 corridors indicated here. I will not go into the details of it, but it was primarily of the reasons that out of these 4 countries, there are 2 landlocked countries, and in order to facilitate the trade in this corridor, what kind of technology infusion which perhaps can facilitate this quite well. So I am coming to the recommendation of this. I am not going further on this one, that it calls for cross-border automation between customs which was needed, cross-border digital customs transit declarations to be transacted electronically between the 2 countries. How it will be done, I have captured few slides for you to really enjoy as to what kind of institutional arrangement within the country exists, and for other countries it exists. But the one thing which is missing is that a mutual understanding between the 2 countries, because that's the base for moving forward. I have only captured that what one would look forward in terms of gaining confidence in moving in an automated environment. I will not go into further on this one, but my presentation is there. So it basically says that LC to be processed electronically. It also talks in terms of between customs to customs electronic interface within the country. Say if it is Nepal importing and exporting through Calcutta or Haldia ports, whether there is a case for us to introduce enough of technology for customs within the country to move forward, as well as the cross-border customs interactions. So this talks in terms of whether between India and Bhutan there is a case that we can leverage on technology, and this brings here that there is enough of case that we can use ICT for transacting the business between 2 countries. How it will be done, that is captured in few of the slides. Payments to be done electronically, there is a method available, and perhaps both the countries can use it. Documents which are sent by paper can be transacted electronically. These are the recommendations which I will deal separately. Harmonization of the document which is necessary. There are electronic equivalent of various documents which are structured at the level of the UN initiatives, perhaps which need to be integrated, and that's what is expected out of this. So I am only dealing the recommendation at this stage, cross-border electronic submission and recognition of document. You are saying that within the country, in this country, you have an IT Act, Information Technology Act, which says that a electronic document has the same validity in court of law as that of a paper document. How it is done? That you do hand signature on a paper document, and you can do a digital signature or electronic signature on an electronic document which has acceptability in the court of law. This is within the country. But suppose somebody is sitting in Nepal and trying to get the shipment cleared through Calcutta or Haldia port. How it happens? That Nepal has also created a framework wherein an electronic document is admissible as an evidence in court of law by digital signature. Now the only thing which is missing is that India doesn't recognize Nepal's digitally signed document, and vice versa is not true. We are still in the process of discussions with Nepal and other neighbors, that there is a case that we can recognize each other's electronic document, so that the paper which flows from Nepal to Calcutta port for clearances, that can be submitted electronically. So today the paper which flows from Kathmandu to Calcutta port, it takes anywhere from 5 days to 10 days in physical form. But if it can be digitally signed in Nepal and can be submitted, perhaps this happens the same day. The time taken could be 1 hour or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on the efficiency of the systems which operates in the back end. So that's what is being contemplated. We had a discussion with the Nepal authorities, and this is a doable proposition. This itself cut short the 5 days or 10 days to same day process. The other issue is that customs transit declaration. Suppose a consignment is loaded on 3 trucks and they move from Calcutta to Raxaul. In the process, document is with 1 truck. If that is the last, 2 of them are waiting at the Raxaul border. So suggestion is that the declaration form which is issued at the Calcutta port can be transacted electronically between Indian customs in Calcutta to Indian customs at Raxaul. That is a proposal within customs that operates, and that is a doable proposition which customs is quite geared up to facilitate this through a electronic signature arrangement. So this is a workable proposition. How it happens in an electronic environment, I have captured few of the slides for you. Process is very simple. There is an electronic document. It goes to a computing system. It can be a PC, it can be a desktop, or even it can be a mobile phone which has the capabilities to digitally sign a document in the current environment. That goes to that. There are automated processes for signing the document, and then there is it can be transacted over internet, and when it is received by the relying party, means the importer on the other end, he has facility to verify the signature affixed on this is the signature of the exporter. That is a process which is available today. Within the country, the only thing is that cross-border recognition is an issue which need to be addressed, which needs to be recognized by everyone, and that is a process which is available today. What happens within the country, I have captured for you that there is a certifying authority route, and there are multiple certifying authorities within the country, and the subscriber who go to a certifying authority ask for a digital certificate, and through this he can sign a document. This process is available within the country. This process is available in other countries also. So there need to be a arrangement or a regulation within the country that we should be able to recognize a digitally signed document from emanating from Nepal and vice versa. That dialogue is on. I think that once it is done, the cross-border trade can be facilitated in a big way. The process for this is that this is Indian regulator at one end and the other countries on the other end, and if they can mutually recognize each other, the system flows, and that is what is expected out of this arrangement. And perhaps majority of the delays in transacting the business can be taken care of. This is a process of mutual recognition which is available. You must have heard that UNCITRAL has worked out an electronic commerce document which facilitates electronic commerce, cross-border trade, e-signature, e-authentication. All these instruments are available under the UNCITRAL framework, and India's IT Act is based on that, and majority of our trading partners have based their Electronic Commerce Act or Digital Signature Recognition Act within the country based on this. So there is a case that since all of them are compatible to that extent, that compatibility between two mutual recognition framework can be achieved, and a cross-border paperless trade can be a reality that can be achieved. So e-filing of the document not only within the country, in India a lot of this happens, but if it is cross-border, how it happens is basically mutual recognition of the document across the boundary need to be worked out, and if that is so, then there is a case for I have taken the example of these 4 countries. If I take the example of these 4 countries, India has an Information Technology Act where e-signature is available. Nepal has an act which from where flows the e-signature, and same is available in Bangladesh. Unfortunately, this is not available in Bhutan. We have extended them a facility that they can rely on Indian systems, they can make use of it. If this happens, then perhaps all the 4 countries for which that BPA analysis was carried out, perhaps they can be benefited through a system of mutually recognizing each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Khan Sahab. That was very, very useful. The key message which we can take home from your presentation is the need for the national regulators in this region to cooperate, coordinate, so that there is an increased possibility of mutual recognition of e-documents within this region. And what was also very interesting from your presentation was not only did you give us your vision, but also you prescribed some very practical steps in how to realize and how to implement the vision. So maybe there is some important takeaways from what you've said. I would now turn to Dr. Tengfei Wang from the UN ESCAP Bangkok.
Thank you, and also thank you for RIS for inviting us to attend this very important meeting. It's also interesting that probably for policymakers, the trade facilitation is a very specific area. But for me, if I work, my main duty is to promote trade facilitation in the region. I feel it's a very broad area. So what I can do is really just a reflection of a few selected areas. And I decided to use PowerPoint presentation because I feel the information I'm going to share with you will complement some presentations or some comments made early. So I'm going to show you some data to show trade facilitation situation in South Asia. So the issue I'm going to touch upon including the trade cost, the trade process and procedures, implementation of trade facilitation and paperless trade measures, and transit issue, and also point out the way forward. Again, I see that I'm going to discuss a few selected areas, and I feel trade facilitation for me is quite broad. And also ask the chairman to remind me. I try to be disciplined. I try to finish my presentation within 8 to 10 minutes. So first, trade costs. And I heard several speakers or panelists already mentioned that the trade costs in South Asia are relatively high. But how high it is, and is that a way that we can measure it? So against this background, actually, UNSGAP and World Bank developed the SGAP World Bank International Trade Cost Database, mainly based on gravity theory. So this current version database includes data from 1995 to year 2013 for over 180 countries. There's a lot of findings from this database. You look at the database. And one thing I would like to highlight is the last one. It's quite interesting that it's also reconfirmed the observation of other panelists that it's often cheaper for developing countries to trade with far away developed countries than to trade with neighbors. So this is not only the case for countries in some countries in South Asia, but also for many developing countries in Asia and the Pacific. And also we talk about the regional integration. It's interesting to look at the intra-regional trade. So here, if you look at the figure, I'm not sure whether you can really see it, but the thing I want to highlight, for instance, if you look at the SAARC 4 countries, we are talking about Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. According to SGAP World Bank Trade Database, the trade cost is measured by tariff equivalent. It's around 106%. So if put this into context, if you compare with the ASEAN 4, the result is around 76%. And East Asia 3, talking about Japan, Korean, Republic of Korea, and China, is 51. So it's quite efficient. Because if you look at the EU 3, at 44%. So as East Asia 3 countries very similar to the level of EU 3. So we are talking about Great Britain, France, and Germany. And also here, if you look at the trade costs, if you look at some quite big economies in South Asia, talk about India and Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, compared with other countries such as Japan, China, United States, Germany, etc., trade costs relatively high. So again, there's nothing really new there. We know that trade costs high. What's really value added for the trade cost database is really provide a means to measure how high exactly it is. So how to reduce the trade cost? And I'm sure that we are aware of this, that last year is supposed to be quite a big breakthrough for WTO. The trade facilitation agreement tests were finally agreed in Bali on December 7th last year. But again, there's some setback, especially India now has some concerns about this TFA. I will not go into details. So SGAP took a different approach to work with the member countries to reduce the costs. And I should thank the first speaker, Mr. Ken. He already covered the BPA part, the business process analysis. So I'm not going to repeat this part. So I also skip some slides. What I want to mention to you is that since the year 2009, we have been working with different countries, also with different international organizations, such as Asian Development Bank, to look at the trade process, look at specific product along specific corridors. So we have more than 50 case studies. Now, we have just developed a database called Trade Facilitation Analysis Database, summarizing these studies and summarize the common barriers for trade facilitation and also the common recommendations to improve or advance trade facilitation. And we call it a TPAT, and we hope it sounds a little bit like an iPad, and we hope it's as useful as iPad. So I'm going to skip a few slides. Another work we did is we want to know that for trade facilitation measures, how many measures have been implemented by the countries. So to get the answer, we started conducting survey since year 2012. And this year we actually joined hands with 4 other United Nations regional commissions in a collaboration with OECD and the Oceania Custom Organization. So we have done several round studies. We look at the different trade facilitation measures. For instance, the measures listed here, how many of them already been implemented by the countries. And this come to the country ranking. What we did is, whenever one trade facilitation measure is implemented by a country, the country score 1. So we added this up, the full score is 100. So we see if you look at the region, obviously Singapore is quite advanced. It's ranked number 1 in implementation of trade facility measures. In the SAARC area or South Asia, India, because the country the size, and India implement many trade facility measures, is ranked number 4 in the region. And the second best performer in the region, including Sri Lanka. We believe that because it had a very big seaport, Colombo. And then we also see Bangladesh, and move forward, we see Pakistan, Maldives, Nepal, and toward the bottom we see Afghanistan and Bhutan. Obviously, Afghanistan and Bhutan have their own situation and challenges. So this is a comparison of different regions actually, in terms of average score for implementation of trade facilitation measures. We see that the SAARC 8 countries in South Asia, the level is very similar to East and Northeast Asia, including those from Central Asia. And we also did a regression analysis. We see the trade costs and also implementation of trade facilitation measures. We feel that if you implement more measures, the trade cost should be reduced. And this result seems to convince our assumption. And this shows that we did some simulation analysis. The scenario is if the countries implement trade facilitation measures, how much trade cost they can reduce. And here is a very narrow definition of trade cost, because we only talk about those containerized cargo moving in inland area. We see that the India will be the very big winner. If implement all these measures, can at least reduce $2 billion, and then followed by Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc. This, please bear in mind that this is also influenced by the trade volume. India can reduce cost a lot because because the large share trade volume compared with, for instance, Bhutan. Bhutan definitely can gain, but the volume compared with India is relatively small. Transit issues, I think I'm going to skip this part because already been discussed, I think, by different speakers. Moving forward, of course, there are many aspects we need to look at it, but one aspect I want to particularly emphasize is to assist countries to establish sustainable national trade and transport facilitation monitoring mechanism. Why we propose this? Because if you look at the country in Asia Pacific, including all the countries in South Asia, actually there are a lot of projects have been done and a lot of money being spent. And there are some excellent study reports, but often there are no follow-ups. There's no really effective follow-up actions. No one really regularly to check whether the recommendation has been followed up, whether the trade facilitation measures are effective or not. So the efforts are often one-off or sometimes ad hoc, and therefore there's really no long-term benefits. Also, to be frank, I think a lot of money being wasted, not only by the countries, also by international organizations. Think about one project, how much money there. If there's no follow-up, just one beautiful study report, in a way it's a waste of money. So, So what should we do? We really propose the country that the country should establish long-term integrated sustainable trade and transport facilitation monitoring mechanism. If you look at this mechanism, there are basically two functions. The first is we try to identify the bottlenecks, come up with recommendations, etc. And then the country go to implement some trade facilitation measures according to recommendations. And then you check whether they are effective or not. So these are key functions of this system. And the methodology supporting system we call the BPA+, called Business Process Analysis, supplemented by other trade facilitation measures. I will not go into details. And we emphasize that there should be, in the long term, should be carried out by the experts from the country. In other words, you don't fly the consultants from Europe, from Washington, D.C., because that's going to be very expensive. And we also emphasize there must be proper institutional arrangement to support this. For instance, we probably can rely upon National Trade Transport Facilitation Committee to guide the work. And the real work can be done by research institute and by customs officers and also by industry. And if we conduct this trade and transport facility monitoring mechanism, what do we get? So we will get a database. So here we have a lot of data we collect for products, for corridors, for border crossing. We also have a set of indicators. And here we call it the dashboard, because we want to present the result to different level audience. For policymakers, maybe you pick up a few key indicators. But for researchers, we might provide more detailed information and data. And also an annual report to analyze the key issues. And I'm very glad to report to you that this idea being supported jointly by UNESCAP and also by ADB. So the publication was launched in September, late September, at the Asia Pacific Trade Facilitation Forum. So both organizations are very committed to support the country to implement this. And relevant to South Asia, so we are now working with Bhutan, Bangladesh, and also Nepal to establish this. So finally, quickly move to my recommendations. I know that I think I used too much time. So come to recommendations. So the first thing I want to highlight is monitoring of trade facilitation in a sustainable manner is essential and possible for all countries. It doesn't need to be expensive. It doesn't need millions of dollars. And the monitoring tools are available. And there's a lot of tools developed by UNESCAP, ADB, World Bank, and all other organizations. The only thing is you need to use it. And also, the first point I want to highlight, I feel the most important, is the countries in the end, or in the long term, need to be in the driving seat. So the country really takes the effort, initiative to monitor trade facilitation. And there are some further readings and some relevant work. If you are interested, please take a look. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Wang. I think the essence of what you said really was captured by one of the post-its on in one of the slides, which said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Thanks a lot for the excellent work which UNESCAP has been doing in this area, and for your very innovative suggestion on trade and transport facilitation monitoring mechanism. If countries are able to put in place such a mechanism, I'm sure it will go some distance in helping them reduce the trade facilitation costs. I would now turn to Mr. Ismail Nashid from Maldives Customs to give us the perspective of the implementers and the users as well.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great privilege for me to be here attending this forum. First of all, I would like to thank RIS for inviting me and giving me this opportunity to participate in this session on trade facilitation and customs cooperation. I am a working customs officer, so my perspective is a bit presentation is not so much on technical details, but on the ground, what's going on and what should be done at a ground level. I have been working in Maldives Customs for the past 14 years and have worked in major areas of operation. Currently, I am working at the Commissioner General's office, mostly dealing with policy and strategic management aspect of things. Traditionally speaking, even now, but more on traditional aspects, the role of customs has always been taken as the gatekeeper. The customs authorities represent a barrier through which international trade must pass in an effort to protect the interests of the nation. Such a role is often manifested by regulatory interventions in commercial transactions simply for the sake of intervention. Customs has the authority to do so, and no one really is keen to question that authority. However, in this day and age, social expectations no longer accept the concept of intervention for the sake of intervention. Rather, it has to be intervention by exception, that is, intervention where there is a legitimate need to do so, intervention based on identified risks. Customs is not the only agency working at the border dealing with import and export. However, compared to other administrative agencies, customs has an advantage in initiating and achieving modernization when compared with other border agencies, because mainly they are guided by international standards developed through organizations such as WTO and WCO. It is encouraging to note that all the countries of South Asia are full members of WCO, and majority of the countries are also members of WTO. WCO has issued numerous tools targeting trade facilitation and customs cooperation and harmonization. All the countries of South Asia are contracting parties to HS Convention, and majority of the members have also acceded to revised Kyoto Convention, RKC. The remaining members are also at the final stages of accession to RKC. Other tools are also being applied in different countries. Then the challenge, however, in the region is the effective practical implementation of these instruments. Despite shared key principles originally intended to harmonize, practical application and interpretation vary across countries. Measures to facilitate trade such as publication of laws and regulation, standardization of documents, electronic declaration, risk management, etc., are also measures which are dealt by RKC and other WCO supporting tools, as well as the new WTO Trade Facilitation Agreement. However, perhaps due to the cost and the lack of technical capacity, implementation as well impact differ across countries. Studies conducted by WCO and many other institutions have identified many impediments that the private sector face in cross-border movement of goods, 7 of which related to customs I have listed here. They include varying customs documentation standards, lack of adequate IT infrastructure and interoperable data sharing systems, need for multiple financial guarantees, arbitrary administrative fees, insufficient operating hours at customs offices, uncoordinated national authorized economic operator programs, and delays in screening. At individual country levels, modernization and reform of customs and border agencies are ongoing. Adopting modern automated systems such as Asikuda World and acceding to convention, as I mentioned, RKC, are trends that are common and consistent in the region. Great deal of work is also being carried out under ADB, SASEC umbrella as well. The question is then, why is the impact of these reforms not so apparent in South Asia? Doing Business 2015 by World Bank shows South Asia lagging behind compared to most other regions. For instance, in trading across borders index, it takes around 34 days to export and import in South Asia, while 20 days in East Asia and Pacific, and 10 days in OECD high-income countries. The issue, in my opinion, in the region lies a lot in the practical application of these sophisticated tools on the ground. Changing work culture and mindsets must be a priority, which must go hand in hand with implementation. If perception and mindsets of implementing officials on the ground are not addressed in line with implementing these instruments, then the term trade facilitation usually ends up being merely used as a term to get away, perhaps in cases of dispute settlement. Intervention for the sake of intervention still carries on. Exchange of information between customs administration through bilateral cooperation agreements are also in use in most countries of the region. These agreements, as of now, however, are generally formulated with an enforcement focus, where exchange of information is restricted to cases where fraud is suspected. Such exchange in effect do not in practice benefit the legitimate trade flow. The focus of these agreements, on the other hand, can be made with a facilitation perspective where legitimate trade is facilitated through exchange of trade information. Accredited client programs, as have been discussed before, AEO should be mutually recognized. The information used for export declaration processing for country A can be used as import declaration for country B. The technical details also has been very rightly discussed in my previous presentations. The interoperability of systems must therefore be a target to further enhance customs cooperation in the region. The principles of customs procedures are same in most countries, especially where WCO standards are followed. However, data processing systems are different. Many countries in the region are using Asikuda, including Maldives. However, Asikuda has its limitations. For instance, in Maldives customs, we have developed several of our own applications to supplement what is lacking in Asikuda. This includes valuation database and other supplementary tools as well. On the other hand, I am informed that India Custom uses their own system, which has much advanced utilities than found in Asikuda. Therefore, to achieve the interoperability to facilitate exchange of information, why not all countries in the region use or develop systems along with India systems? So to conclude my remarks, for customs modernization to be effective, concentration must be placed on implementation and performance aspects of things. Changing of work culture and perception must be a priority. To harmonize application of standards and procedures, systems must be integrated to ensure practical interpretation and application do not differ. Data harmonization and implementation of national single windows with a focus to achieve interoperability and ultimately a regional single window must be the vision of the region when we talk about customs union. The existing SARC subgroup on customs cooperation can take the initiative to coordinate and monitor the ongoing modernization projects of all customs administration of the region, to identify areas where collaboration is required and take the leadership to harmonize this process and achieve interoperability in systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ismail, for highlighting 3 or 4 very key aspects from the practitioner's perspective, that of harmonization, implementation, and seamless interoperability of systems across borders. I would now turn to Mr. Raghu Dayal of AITD.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Khan. Actually, I rediscovered him after a couple of decades. We used to be neighbor in Commerce Ministry, where he taught me some basics of computers. And when entire Babudam in Commerce Ministry depended on DGCIS data, which was only 3 years behind schedule, he was able to produce current data within 6 weeks of transactions having been done. Thank you, Mr. Khan. But when I say this, I must also add, the more the things change, the more they remain the same. You talked of a digital atmosphere in commerce. You talked of how days in Haldia and Calcutta ports will be able to convert days into hours and hours into minutes, so that the consignments can be cleared at Raxaul and Birganj within a matter of minutes. EDI, we heard that EDI we have not been able to do in India in spite of the last 25 years of sustained hard work. The first working group with Mr. Tejendra Khanna, I remember I happened to be part of it. Nripendra Mishra, who was Additional Secretary of Commerce, he took over from him, but we still have to see the real implementation of EDI even in our own transactions. Now, when I say this, there is a little purpose. We were told that Dr. Wang mentioned that in South Asian situation, the cost of trade transaction is relatively high. These are the exact words he used. I would like to submit here that trade transaction costs, logistics related trade costs, are of the order of 15 to 24% on empirical study, which is more than twice of what it is in European Union and in NAFTA and in ASEAN. Now, we have a lot of ground to cover. Now, this does not depend on mere digitalization of our transactions. It doesn't depend on scarcity of capital for building infrastructure. It basically facilitation, connectivity, these are means to an end. What is the end? End essentially is that my trade costs should be able to come down, the transaction cost. And it has two elements, direct cost and indirect cost in terms of time. You mentioned some data that later on our friend from Maldives, that days taken for export and import in relation to SAARC country trade are of the order of 34, 33 days. OECD had done a study a few years ago. We said SAARC exports take on an average 34 days vis-a-vis 12 days in OECD. For imports, it takes 46 days vis-a-vis 14 days in OECD. Now that is the gulf. Take costs. NCAER, at the instance of World Bank, carried out a study, and it determined that the logistics related cost in relation to the product cost in SAARC countries was of the order of 12.93%, when it should be only 1.91%. And they gave specific examples, some consignments of wheat being carried to Bangladesh from India. It incurred an additional cost equal to more than 9% of the total cost of that consignment, to be precise 56,000 rupees at that time. Now, I'm saying this with a little purpose. And that purpose is that we can have discussions, we can have seminars in rarefied atmosphere of ballroom Oberoi and multipurpose IIC. At the field, situation is different. Mr. Sherawat told us 80% of India's exports to Bangladesh go through land custom station at Petrapol. What happens at Petrapol? I don't know how many of them go. I would like to urge Mr. Professor Prabir Day, the next session like this should be held at some workaday example where people can see for themselves what the situation is. There are hundreds and hundreds of trucks waiting for each other from Petropol to get into Benapole. And this is the situation anywhere. Petropol specifically, he also mentioned that there is only one weigh bridge. Now a weigh bridge which supposed to weigh trucks, laden trucks, which go from India to Bangladesh and which come from Bangladesh to India, it is compulsorily required. There is only one weigh bridge. Hundreds of trucks are waiting. How much does one in-motion 50-ton weigh bridge cost? I checked up. It costs less than 15 lakhs of rupees. And if I was an entrepreneur, I'll put up 2 weigh bridges, charge an amount of 2 rupees, 3 rupees per weighment, and I will be a millionaire in 2 years. Now this only goes to show there is tremendous amount of wealth. Take another day. Khan Sahab, you can take the digital documents, CTD, consignment transit declaration, or I would like to say combined transport document, as the customs would like to say. It can reach there, but then there is no similarity of even holidays. One country wants to, at the same station, one country wants to have the holiday on a Friday, another wants to have it on Sunday. Somebody says my working hours are from 10 to 5, the others will say I am only from 12 to 6. Now these are basic issues. It has to be 24/7. Trade cannot wait. It has to be round the clock. It has to be every day of the week. Now these are things which do not require capital. These are things which require only simple empathy that yes, we should be able to do. But who goes and visits these workplaces where the actual transaction takes place? So we look at the Mount Everest. We have to climb Mount Everest. We don't want to look at the small molehills which need to be first tackled. These are basic issues which do not require, as I repeat, any capital. There are pre-1947 linkages available between India and Pakistan, rail and road, India and Bangladesh, rail and road. If we were to only reconnect, refurbish with nominal investment, we have any number of transactions possibilities done. But we talk in terms of billions of dollars, we make plans and projects. I'm not trying to be cynical. At this age, I can't afford to be. 45 years ago, I attended the first meeting in your office, Dr. Wong. At that time, it was ICAFE, precursor of ESCAP, doing the concept of Trans-Asian Railway. Trans-Asian Railway at that time was supposed to cover only the southern corridor from Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Burma, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, get into Iran, onwards to Istanbul. Today, it remains exactly at the same stage. When the northern corridor via Trans-Siberian Railway and the central corridor via Kazakhstan was not in the realm of imagination. And as you know, container trains are operating for the last 5 years on those routes. And the southern corridor of Trans-Asian Railway just does not figure any scheme of things. Today, you can run a container train from Dhaka to West Europe. From Dhaka comes to Calcutta, Calcutta to Delhi, Delhi to Atari Wagah, gets into the Chaman, Koheta, Aftan, Mirjaway, and many of us don't know that from the border of Iran and Pakistan at Mirjaway, there is a 92-kilometer stretch which is the same gauge as India, Bangladesh and Pakistan. And only one transshipment at Zahedan, we are able to run a train through. The northern corridor, the central corridor involves at least 4 transshipments. from meter gauge to standard gauge to Russian gauge. In spite of that, they made a success. All that is needed is a fresh look at our own thing. It's possible, not much of capital is required, certain amount of sincere application of what is possible, we are capable of doing it, it can be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dayal, for taking us away from digital environment to ground realities. I would now turn to Mr. Shashank Priya, who is Commissioner Customs at Patna, who I'm glad to say has not only climbed the Mount Everest in respect of customs matters, but has also looked very closely at the molehills. So Shashank, we look forward to hearing from you.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for introducing me as a person who has dealt with the nitty-gritties of customs as well. And going by the experience that I have of handling both the policy level and the ground level issues of customs trade facilitation, I do think that the picture is not as bleak as it is made out. I think we have made substantial progress, and definitely there is a lot of scope to do much more improvement. And what I will try to capture here is that a little bit on the literature side, and then we will see as to what are the various issues that can be addressed to facilitate a movement towards South Asian Union, or what kind of advantages that can arise by moving towards that, or what steps would be precursors to the same. So this point doesn't need a lot of elaboration. Linkage between trade facilitation and trade growth. There are a lot of studies available which talks about linkage between delay and its effect on trade. Delay in clearance of shipment and its effect on trade. The impact of documentation and its larger number of documentation leading to increased cost of trade. So there are various figures by various authors, and it is also well documented that once if you can enhance trade, that would also enhance GDP, and if you facilitate trade, it would enhance GDP, and it is expected that some 2.5% of GDP of Asia Pacific can be enhanced if we can enhance trade facilitation. OECD studies are also there, and then there is an interesting study at a field level by Martin Kuss in 2013 based on firm level export of Uruguay, and which says that one additional day of delay in customs could cause 2.8% decline in growth rate of exports. So there is definitely a very close linkage, and this is what we have to try to continuously address. Now the question arises, how do we figure in today's scheme of things? Asia Pacific as a whole is a very curious mix. We have some of the top performers and some of the quite at the bottom of the ladder. So you have Singapore, Hong Kong, China, Malaysia, which are the top. Korea also is amongst the top. But if you look at the South Asia, which I have put in red, all of them are in the bottom half. And that has an impact on the trade facilitation environment, because it is very clear that what has happened is that since our procedures, or part of it is also related to the issues of transit, the environment of trade facilitation is having an impact on the ranking that we have on the country's ease of doing business standing. This again has been pointed out how South Asia is amongst the least performers in terms of time and cost of import and export. And only thing I would like to point out here is that South Asia is, it seems, is, this is of course 2013 study. I will show you 2014, and both you would see that Eastern Europe and Central Asia also seems to be doing quite badly. So that's why I feel that a lot of it has to do with transport facilitation as well. Those which are landlocked countries, they also suffer a lot of geographical disadvantage. And this is what is about individual countries again. One will see that countries of South Asia, the time taken for export and time taken for import is very large, and how do we try to address it is the issue. This is the 2014, again it is the same. Some of the features that has already been discussed about South and Central Asian, the trade costs are high, much higher compared to the G7, and the reasons that have been identified through literature, through field level surveys, documentation requirements are high, trade procedures are not as transparent as they ought to be, but I do feel that this is getting addressed more and more by use of information technology, and I am hoping that trade facilitation agreement of WTO would considerably enhance this aspect of transparency by requiring that all the laws should be put on the internet, that there should be advance consultation before laws are brought into practice, there should be mechanisms by which there would be regular review of laws and their improvement as it required. So there is a challenge here of non-transparent trade procedures. One thing, though, it was pointed out that trade infrastructure is not an issue, but I mean that a lot can be achieved without talking about millions of dollars. But I do think that trade infrastructure is an equally important issue. The kind of problems we have with respect to road connectivity, rail connectivity, the number of bridges, the at some of the border crossings, you have train lines going, and the trucks have to wait, because at least 25 times to 30 times a day the crossings are closed because they are very important train lines. So these kind of issues are very, very important. They are single lane roads, whereas you require now 4-lane roads, or maximum double lane roads are there, which is all leading to congestion. There were discussion about lack of adequate space where goods can be checked. This is very true in the India-Nepal border. I'm surprised as to how officers work in Raxaul. There is so much of shortage of space regarding how do you check goods and the kind of work that is done. And by the way, the issues that were discussed about difference in timing of officers working in across the borders, the holidays not being aligned, these are very important issues, and I think steps are now being taken. Like India-Nepal border, it has been agreed that there will be a 24/7 clearance, and I'm hoping that this would be a template that will be followed across other land borders as well. Corruption is always an issue, and one hopes that as you become more and more transparent in terms of trade procedures, that will improve. And landlocked countries, as I mentioned, is much higher cost. And as a result of all these problems, one thing that South Asia is missing out on is it's not as active in the global value chain scenario as Southeast Asia is. So that is also partly because of the poor trade facilitation environment that we have. And you see that today South Asia trades much more with distant markets in North America, Japan, Europe, and the trading across the region itself is much less. Part of this reason is that, of course, ability to produce, supply, the complementarity issue, those are also there. Sometimes we all produce complementary goods, so we may not be able to supply Bangladesh and say India and Pakistan. They all have strong strength in textiles, but India is also now having a lot of strength on, say, machinery, on some other higher value products, where it does have a competitive advantage. But what has happened is, over the period of time, maritime trade has always taken more precedence than the ports. And as a result, you would see that a lot of trade facilitation efforts have originally taken place on the maritime side, on modernization of port, and much less on land borders. It is now that land borders are getting a much greater focus. All the automation that was done was initially at air cargo complexes or ports. Now it is that we are looking at land borders. I remember when we used to be discussing in terms of WTO negotiations, land borders were the only one where EDI was yet not come about, whereas it had already happened in the port. So that is one of the things. And South Asia, a lot of important trade does occur through land borders. So it is important when we are talking of improving trade facilitation that we look at land border more closely. Excessive documentation has been a bane, and one of the ways of trying to reduce it is try to emulate what the European Union has done, look at some kind of a single administrative document and try to harmonize the number of fields, the number of the declarations that are needed, and that could possibly help in the kind of discussion that we had about across the border electronic exchange of information and import declaration becoming export declaration. Presently, still the number of documents are very high. As for Bangladesh Nepal trade with India, there are 12 documents, 7 documents, like that. A large number of documents are still required. Still, we talked about using customs harmonized standards of the WCO, but as on 2014, not all South Asian countries are signatories of the revised Kyoto Convention. Only Bangladesh, India and Sri Lanka are signatories. So it is important that one moves towards these kind of international conventions, because that is what will bring about modern practices like using risk management system, audit-based controls, advanced rulings, which are the way that the future customs interventions will work. ICT, Mr. Khan talked a great deal about, and before we launch into cross-border trade, paperless trade, which SCAP is working very strongly on for Asia Pacific region, there is important that in South Asia, use of automation, tracking systems are established in a much stronger way than what it is today in smaller countries, and I do believe that SASAC initiative is trying to address this issue. And once we have established ICT system, that becomes the springboard for single window system, which is the future for achieving better coordination and also trying to achieve some sort of a linkage between various agencies which deal with the border clearance. We have an example, and it shows what kind of challenge it is, the ASEAN single window system, where it involves all the 10 ASEAN member countries to develop their own national single window, and it has not yet been done, and they have a target of 2015, but it is estimated that it will not happen before 2018. So these are all steps, if they are taken at this stage, if we start talking about them, if we start implementing them, possibly this will all be future good steps for whatever form closer economic cooperation takes place between South Asia. I don't know whether it can be a customs union, but whatever is a closer economic cooperation. There is already national technical standards. It's very important because some studies show that SPS and TBT barriers are the most frequent NTB in South Asia. So there is a ground for mutual recognition agreement for accreditation and certification activities. And as I mentioned, improved borders infrastructure, integrated checkposts are being made, and this is really required for the way the trade at border is conducted. This is another issue that has been again and again coming as to why vehicles have to load and unload cargo when they are crossing border checkpost. There is a requirement, there is a need that registered vehicles, movement of registered vehicles from one country into another, at least up to the unloading point of each country, it should be allowed, so that there is no need for having some sort of a waiting time for trucks to unload goods and then load it again, and which is a problem. But I do believe some studies show that this is also part of the reason is the so-called transport imbalance between the various transport operators of the countries. If such a situation is allowed, whatever are the transport operators in the area, perhaps the Indian transport operators will start getting the major share of the business. So maybe some sort of a permit scheme, something has to be done to also take care of the business angle of interest of the local transport operators. So these would be some of the issues on trade facilitation that can help in addressing the so-called barriers to trade, which makes us much lower in ranking in the ease of doing business, and which is proving a barrier for trade within the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shashank, for providing us a fairly detailed idea of different facets of trade facilitation, and in particular highlighting the importance of trade-related physical infrastructure and how transport facilitation has a very important role in trade facilitation. I'm reminded of the recent report prepared by Dr. Seshadri, where the contrast between transport facilitation between India and Myanmar on the one hand and Myanmar and China on the other, the contrast was just too stark, and that contrast surely translates into much lower trade gains, much lower trade between India and Myanmar on the one hand and Myanmar and China on the other. I would now turn to the last expert in this panel, Ms. Darshani Premaratne from IPS.
I'll talk from here. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Abhijit. Right, sorry. Am I heard? Since we've heard about the customs cooperation and points of view from customs officials, and also since we've heard about the overall South Asian trade facilitation aspects, I thought I'll focus on giving some insights of trade facilitation in developments made by Sri Lanka, and also some of the bottlenecks and issues that are remaining and still needs attention. Sri Lanka actually acceded to the Kyoto Convention in 2009, but with the WTO's trade facilitation agreement, the interest was revived in improving trade facilitation in Sri Lanka. And as a result, out of the 41 measures identified by the WTO on trade facilitation, Sri Lanka has fully compliant measures. Sri Lanka has complied with about 20 measures out of 41 already, which includes legal provisions for rejected goods and temporary admission of goods inward-outwards processing, and some of the opportunities to comment and inform before entry into force for traders. And also customs has introduced the single administrative document for imports and exports, and has reduced the number of documents as a result to 7 on average this is, and this varies from product to product. And also Sri Lanka has been able to partially comply with another 20 measures, which are namely, for instance, although we have the customs website in place, the information available is not up to date, and some of the information is not there at all, and so that needs more improvement in that department. And also, although customs had considered itself as a facilitator instead of an enforcer in Sri Lanka, they are taking measures to improve, to move the Asikuda World system into a fully operational package, as currently it is automated up to a certain extent where only the customs declaration could be submitted and processed, and since then the customs declaration has to be taken by the customs house agent or the trader physically to several different agencies. And Sri Lanka is currently in the process of negotiating and working with the relevant authorities like the Standards Institution, the Ports Authority, and the private banks, as currently only the public banks, which is the Bank of Ceylon and the People's Bank of Sri Lanka, is incorporated in the system. So they are in the process of negotiating with other agencies who are relevant who are in the trade process, and get them on board and make that facility available for all the traders in Sri Lanka, so that once the CUSDEC is submitted by the trader, it could be accessed by all the relevant agencies instead of them taking the CUSDEC physically to several different agencies. And also the human interaction therefore still remains at large. And the traders believe, as I think one of the customs officials mentioned, there needs a change in mindset. So the traders in Sri Lanka also believe that there needs an attitude change among the customs officials. And also another bottleneck that remains is the customs website does not provide the time limit for clearance of goods, cargo, and also the available fees and charges and the taxes are also not up to date. So these are some of the measures that need customs attention in moving towards a fully automated or paperless or seamless trading system. And as Mr. Shashank also mentioned, we also believe that the lack of mutual recognition agreements between Sri Lanka and its partner countries have led to a lot of additional checks, certification on goods at the importing country, have caused a lot of in terms of additional costs, and it has caused time-wise and financial-wise cost in terms of because of the lack of mutual recognition agreements, and this has resulted in especially the lack of MRS between India and Sri Lanka has resulted in making this test duplicate in both ends, and also they believe if the two governments can agree on testing and certifying in each country, then extra money and time would not have been spent on demands for additional certificates. And also the certificate of origin in Sri Lanka is issued by the Department of Commerce of Sri Lanka, but this again is a physical process, and this is not an automated process, and they are still working on making it automated. And but the rules of origin, the rules of origin certificate is The rules of origin certificate is issued by the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, which is an automated system, and but these institutes still needs institutional support from the government and from the customs, as they cannot fully automate and go for a fully automated system on their own. And Sri Lanka Customs has also improved their overall efficiency as well, and as a result we have been able to achieve the doing business rank. We have been able to improve the doing business rank from 85 to 69 from 2014 to 2015, and that is in terms of trading across borders. And since Sri Lanka has not connected with South Asian countries by land, the issues and challenges that are related to border sharing is quite limited. But several bottlenecks are still prevailing, and these need customs cooperation and also cooperation between governments, and in terms of facilitating and improving the infrastructure. And so with that, I think I will wrap up for the time being. I think I will address any comments if there are any, and questions. So thank you very much. I would like to thank RIS and Dr. Prabir for giving us the opportunity to come and speak here. Thank you.
Thank you, Darshini, for providing us a very good overview of how Sri Lanka is very well placed to implement the Trade Facilitation Agreement if and when it comes into existence. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the experts. We can spend about 10 minutes on questions, and thereafter we would wrap up. If there are any questions, I'd be grateful if you could address the questions to the particular expert. As to Dr. Seshadri. Prabir, do we have a mic somewhere?
Thank you, I think, for all the excellent presentations. I just wanted to ask a little more clarification on one of the slides that I saw from Mr. Tengfei Wong's presentation, which showed that in terms of implementation of trade facilitation measures, South Asian countries were not so badly off. In fact, if I got it correctly, India was number 4, and there were several other countries which were further down, including China, for example. Now, if that is the position on trade facilitation, why is the cost of transporting a container so high? Is that because of logistics cost, transaction cost? So this breakdown, has there been any attempt to break that down and see where exactly the cost for South Asia is higher? Is it on trade facilitation or is it on something else? Thank you.
Maybe we'll take 3 or 4 questions. Soumya.
This is not a question, just in continuation of what Mr. Khan has mentioned in his presentation. That I am from the ADB, Asian Development Bank, and recently as part of the SASEC Trade Facilitation Initiative, we have started the pilot e-tracking, cross-border secured tracking and monitoring of cargo from Kolkata port to Phunsholing in Bhutan. And the pilot has been completed, and we are expecting that by the end of this year, we'll come out with the feasibility study report. In fact, UNSCAP is supporting us in this initiative. So just to share a piece of information. Thank you.
Thank you, Soumya. Dr. Prabir Dey had a question.
Sir, I have just a query to Mr. Khan, that when you said about custom transit document, where are we? Is it already signed between India, Nepal, India, Bhutan, or what is the status now? And then to Professor Sasank, when you talk about the national single window, then where are we to implement the regional single window? In fact, in yesterday's inaugural speech, Honorable Vice President, he talked about regional single window. So maybe you may give some insights about, we have Sri Lankan participants, Mr. Raghu Dayalji and Maldives, also Tangfei. Is it that India will be more interested to implement authorized economic operator project, or driving the regional single window? What should be our strategy? Thank you.
If there are no more questions, then could I turn to Dr. Tengfei Wong and thereafter Dr. Khan and any others on the panel who would like to respond.
Thank you very much. I think it's a really good question. I think the thing when we look at the issue, definitely it's very important to implement trade facilitation measures. And the country, when they implement these measures, and also definitely going to reduce the trade costs, but to some extent, because there's some other factors as well. For instance, if you look at South Asian countries and also those countries in Central Asia, they are landlocked. They are actually far from the seaport. So these physical barriers are there because of long distance. So this cost is really very difficult to get down. So definitely, yes, it's going to reduce costs, but it cannot really fundamentally change the trade costs. Another thing, I think I heard something, I haven't seen the study, but there's some interesting comment I heard. Singapore is always ranked either #1 or #2 in Logistics Performance Index, because sure, Singapore implement many trade facilitation measures, but also because Singapore is strategically located and has a very good seaport and also located in international shipping routes. But if you put Singapore to some area in Kyrgyzstan or some Central Asia, and the trade cost will dramatically increase, even they implement our trade facilitation measures. So I'm saying this not try to contrast myself. What I'm trying to say is definitely the country, when they implement trade facilitation measures, they will reduce the costs. But there are some other factors really, have some sort of impact on the trade costs. Thank you. Yes.
Maybe we will just finish with Mr. Khan, Shashank, and thereafter I turn to.
Thank you, Mr. Das. Yeah, thank you. I'll use this. Yeah. Basically, coming to Dr. Prabir De has asked very relevant question that when we did BPA for this region, he was also part of it, and the question is quite pertinent that that where do we stand. In my presentation, I have tried to capture that majority of the member states in this region, they have worked out their E-Transaction Act or E-Commerce Act, or you call it any this thing, wherein that you have made provisions within the national jurisdiction that an electronically transacted document would have the same validity in court of law as that of a paper-based document. That happens in India and that happens in many other jurisdictions. I would not go into details of it, but since you have asked about what happens in India and Nepal, Nepal also has a E-Transaction Act which gives recognition to an electronic document in a legal framework. So, having been part of this initiative, once we concluded that there are cases that even a paper-based document flowing from Kathmandu to Indian ports in Calcutta, from where majority of the cargo moves for Nepal, that this 5-10 days can be reduced to 1 day. So I made a reference to them saying that Indian Information Technology Act provides for that a digitally signed document originating from India can be respected by a member participating state, and vice versa can be true, because that is a provision. But for that we need to sign a mutual agreement saying that I will respect your digitally signed document and you will respect mine, meaning thereby that a digital certificate of both the countries would be interoperable and would be respected by both the countries. That signature has not taken place yet,
though I made a reference to them. But on the same note, I would like to give you little more input that we signed an agreement between India and Korea saying that a lot of business interest between the two countries exist. So there is a need for us to transact the business electronically, and we agree to respect each other's digital certificates for digital signatures. So that is one thing which we have already signed, and we are working out the framework for mutual recognition. The other initiative which we made recently that we hosted, Mr.TA, that we have hosted the technical groups meeting of the United Nations Center for Trade Facilitation and Electronic Business, which concluded last week only, wherein we also underlined the interest shown by India and Sri Lanka that we would sign an agreement and move forward. So that is the second initiative which is taken. But with our immediate neighbors, this is still to be achieved, and once we do this, we have made reference to all of them. That will happen. The only unfortunate part is that the Bhutan and Maldives do not have a e-signature act or electronic transaction act. So we have extended them a facility saying that if they want, they can take shelter under the Indian Act, and we can extend this to them for the purpose of recognizing their digital certificate. They can take it from India and make use of it till such time that they create an environment. So that's the stage we are. Thank you very much.
Shashank, would you like to add something?
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, Dr. Day, for your question. My sense is that in South Asia we are still quite some distance away from having a regional single window. In ASEAN context, at least 4-5 of them have already got their single window, like Malaysia, Thailand, and few other countries have got their. Singapore, of course, has a very active single window. Whereas in India, in South Asia, it is only India which has now started the process. And the internal assessment in the Department of Revenue is that it will not take less than 3 years to complete our own project. And one option is that at the same time other countries are encouraged to develop their single window, but in case India develops it and then the other countries take the lead, I think it is a longer time, at least 5 years to 6 years it will take. But I don't think that a single window is the only way to facilitate trade. We can always have cross-border exchange of information on issues like, say, certificate of origin, where there is a lot of delays and problems. So I don't think that every information has to be exchanged on a single window platform. Those which are critical or those which are more prone to delays, those can be at least started on an electronic basis. The other point that I wanted to just refer to was with respect to Dr. Seshadri's question on trade facilitation environment, as to if ranking on trade facilitation is good, why are we still having longer time frames for clearance of goods? I only wanted to highlight that we had done a study when I was working in Center for WTO Studies, and where we found that other agencies have an equally important role in clearing the goods. So we had worked out that from the time that goods land at the border to the time that it reaches the importer's premises, normally it takes about 10 days, and the customs part takes 3 days. The other 7 days are accounted for by various other agencies. One of them are importer themselves. They have a time of, say, 3 days for filing declaration, after which demurrage starts, and they normally file it after 24 hours, whereas if they file it in advance, you will completely save that time. Then time taken for payment of duty. Now, of course, with automated, with electronic payment system, the times would come down, but otherwise they were taking about 12 hours to 14 hours to pay duty. That was again time completely lost on account of import. Then the other issue is regarding, the operators themselves, the shipping agents. Shipping agents have to file their manifest. There are mistakes in filing the manifest. So when the bills of entry are filed, they do not match. The declaration of the bill of entry do not match with the manifest. Then amendments have to be carried out in manifest. So if that is avoided, then time lost there is avoided. Then delivery orders have to be issued by shipping agents. That sometimes takes time, and that also adds to the total cost of clearance of goods. Then transporters, they take time. At times there is time taken for arranging transport. So what I'm trying to say is that today trade facilitation environment is a combination of how efficient our private players and the government agencies are, and the sum total of their efficiency is what determines the efficiency in terms of time in clearance of goods. Thank you.
Thank you, Shashank. I've already got signals from the organizers that we need to wind up quickly. But before we do that, from Mr. Raghu Dayal and the other panelists, if there are any further comments.
Raghu Dayal says his point. I have a little small question to him, if that can be added to what he's going to say.
If you could be kindly
very short,
brief,
brief. This is Suhas Borkar. I share Mr. Raghu Dayal's disappointment. I mean, he said about attending a meeting 45 years ago and nothing moving on the southern corridor or the railways. Now, I think that, I mean, I agree with you, but there have to be strict, some kind of timelines and roadmap, you know, if we have to move ahead. Otherwise, probably 30 years from now, we'll be still, we will be where we are now. Thank you.
1 minute to each of the panelists so that we can wind up within over the next 4 or 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. First, for the cost, as Dr. Wang said, so just to supplement, let's understand the basic logistics in the entire region. 90% of SAARC trade takes place between neighboring countries. And 60% of this total trade takes place through land routes, road and rail. The road and rail becomes important. Now, how does the road traffic move? Principally, the three large economies, say for instance, between India and Pakistan, India and Bangladesh. The goods come from Pakistan, they are offloaded from the trucks at Atari-Wagah border, warehoused, kept in the open, reloaded into Indian trucks. And mutatis mutandis, exactly the same operation takes place at land customs stations between India and Bangladesh. Which means there is wastage, there is multiple handling, there is pilferage, and there is NPA, non-performing assets, capital remains blocked. It adds to the cost. Number two, say for instance between India and Nepal, containers go from Calcutta port to Birganj. Train goes there, it reaches Raxaul. Raxaul is Indian customs station. And the train is supposed to be checked in terms of seals, etc. And if it reaches at a time when it is not working hours, then it has to get detained. And from Raxaul to Birganj ICD is a mighty big distance of less than 4 kilometers. Why shouldn't Indian and Nepalese customs get together and do a joint check? But no, it's a question of sovereignty of India, sovereignty of Nepal. We get enmeshed into these non-issues. I'll give you another example. We really need to stop. Okay, oh no, certainly, I have no problem.
I'm very, very sorry that we've had to stop over here because I understand the next event is about to start. So we've had a fairly rich discussion, and apologies if we could not give enough time to the other resource persons, but a round of applause certainly for the panelists. They've really enriched our understanding. And one last point from my side, if we countries in South Asia are not able to get our acts together on trade facilitation, as Shashank pointed out, with rise in global value chains, we will get progressively isolated and our share in world trade will decline further. So with that food for thought, I close the session and I thank all the resource persons.